a view of what is true and what is good, and then actually structuring and ordering your life towards those ends, towards achieving those ends. So like action is interwoven into the philosophical life. There's an older, richer, thicker way to view philosophy as that's more expansive. So it's not necessarily a subject matter that you study, but for these ancients, I'm thinking like even ancient Christian and non-Christian philosophers, this actually begins with ancient Greek philosophers, that philosophy is an entire way of being in the world, right? From sun up to sundown, right? That permeates and finds its way to kind of interweave itself through how you spend your money, how you spend your time, how you raise your kids, how you discipline your kids, why you discipline your kids. And it's a pervasive way of living. And so for these ancients, philosophy wasn't just, as we tend to think about it today, as just being really razor sharp intellectually, right? For them, it involved philosophy was a much more expansive, broad concept that involved certain spiritual exercises. Oddly enough, we hear that word and we think of like spiritual disciplines. But for these ancient philosophers, the philosophical way of life wasn't just about sitting in your room navel gazing on interesting intellectual puzzles, but it involved orienting yourself to a worldview, a view of the world as true, whatever that was. And so for some of these ancient philosophers, that looked very different from the Christian story. So like take like an Epicurean philosopher. They would say pleasure, like the pursuit of pleasure, the unbridled pursuit of pleasure is the good life, right? Obviously, that's at odds with the Christian story. So a view of what is true and what is good, and then actually structuring and ordering your life towards those ends, towards achieving those ends. So like action is interwoven into the philosophical life for these ancients. And in the book, I try to illustrate just the difference between a moment and a way of life. And so I give the example of like being a surfer, right? Being from Southern California, you guys will appreciate this. So if someone told me they picked up a surfboard and dusted it off and went surfing, right, on their once every 3 years, in no way should they call themselves a surfer. Right?
No, we actually have another term for them. We call them a kook.
You splash them and you tell them to get off the break. And so, yeah, absolutely. So if you know a surfer, they're checking swells. They're making sure they've got the right, thickness on the wetsuit. They're waxing their board. They're making sure their board does not have any, holes in it. It's all sealed up. It's an entire life orientation that marks what they do from sun up to sundown.
By the way, did you ever surf?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
We're going to have to talk about that
off
camera here. Your stock just went up higher.
Yeah. And the same with like, being a runner, being a reader, right? What makes one a runner versus, I like to quickly move my body once a month. You're not a runner, if you know a runner or if you know a musician, you know that their whole life is structured around practicing, playing, writing music. That's what they do. Musicians, music is interwoven into the fabric of their life, right? They're a musician, right? And that's how these ancients understood being a philosopher. It wasn't just you go to a lecture and then you're done, or you take a required philosophy class, check it off your curriculum list, and you're done, right? Not for these philosophers. It was all consuming. It was a way of living for the sake of pursuing a good and flourishing human life. Now, they all had radically different visions of what is real and what is the good life. And that's where the Christian story comes in for Christian philosophers, right? It shapes the coordinates. I call it an existential map in the book, right? We all have an existential map by which we order our lives. And that existential map for Christians is going to be filled out by Scripture and God's revelation to us. What is ultimately real and what's the good life? But it's not just mentally assenting to what's ultimately real and what's truly good. What kind of life is worth living, right? What kind of goods are worth pursuing? But it's the extra step of now you need to like order your life around those coordinates